I still remember that rainy night when my whole world fell apart. The moment I told Sophia I lost my job, I saw something change in her eyes, not sadness, not concern, just disgust. I can't be with someone who can't provide stability, she said, already packing my things. 3 years together meant nothing when I needed her most. She confessed she'd been seeing her ex Ryan for weeks. He has a future, she sneered. What do you have to offer me now? I died that night in more ways than one. But fate gave me a second chance. 5 years in the past. This time I'd watch her world crumble instead. And when she finally begged me to stay, I'd walk away just as cold as she once did to me. The beeping of hospital monitors pulled me back to consciousness. White ceiling tiles came into focus as I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights. An oxygen mask covered my face, and my entire body felt like it had been crushed under a truck. "He's awake," a nurse called out, her voice sounding distant through the ringing in my ears. My mind struggled to piece together what had happened. The last thing I remembered was driving through the rain, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour as tears blurred my vision. Sophia. The memory hit me harder than whatever had put me in this hospital bed. Just hours ago, I had rushed to her apartment, desperate to tell her about losing my job before she heard it from someone else. I had practiced what to say on the drive over, reassuring words about how I had savings, how I'd find something new quickly, how we would get through this together. What a fool I was. When she opened the door, I could tell something was off. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was dressed up, perfume lingering in the air, not the casual loungewear she usually wore when staying in. "Alex, this isn't a good time," she said, blocking the doorway. "I need to talk to you," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I lost my job today. The company is downsizing and they let go of my entire department." I expected her to pull me into a hug, to tell me everything would be okay. Instead, her face hardened and she stepped back, allowing me inside as if it was the last thing she wanted to do. "I see," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "So what's your plan?" "Plan? I just found out today. I thought we could figure it out together." She laughed, a sound I'd never heard from her before. Cold, dismissive. "You mean you want me to figure it out for you?" she said. "I'm not surprised, Alex. You've been coasting at that job for years. I told you to look for something better, something with growth potential." Her words stung like a physical slap. "I came to you for support, not criticism. And I need a partner who can provide stability," she shot back. "Not someone who falls apart at the first sign of trouble." As she spoke, I noticed subtle details I had missed when I first entered. Two wine glasses on the coffee table. A man's jacket draped over the arm of the couch. My stomach dropped. "Is someone here?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sophia sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "This isn't how I wanted to do this, but since you're forcing the issue," she said. "Yes, Ryan is here. We've been seeing each other for a few weeks now." Ryan, her ex-boyfriend, the one she claimed was ancient history when we first started dating. "Weeks," I echoed, my voice hollow. "We've been together for 3 years and you've been cheating on me for weeks." "Don't be dramatic, Alex," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's not cheating. I was already planning to end things with you. Ryan and I reconnected at the charity gala last month and it just feels right. He's going somewhere in life, partner track at his law firm, connections, ambition." I stood there completely numb as she continued dismantling our relationship with surgical precision. "I think it's better this way," she continued, moving around the apartment, gathering items that belonged to me. "A clean break, especially now that you're unemployed." She handed me a small box containing the watch I kept at her place, some toiletries, and a few books. 3 years," I said, my voice barely audible. 3 years and you can just switch me out like that? Oh, Alex. Her voice took on a pitying tone that made my skin crawl. "We had fun, but let's be honest. You were never going to be enough long-term. Ryan has a future. What do you have to offer me now?" In that moment, something inside me broke, not just my heart, but something deeper, something fundamental. I had built my life around this woman, changed jobs to be closer to her apartment, distanced myself from friends she didn't approve of, saved for a ring I thought she wanted. "I loved you," I said simply. "Love doesn't pay the bills," she replied, opening the door. "I think you should go now. Ryan will be out of the shower soon, and this is already awkward enough." I walked out in a daze, her final words barely registering as I made my way to the elevator, down to the parking garage, and into my car. The rain had intensified, matching the storm inside me. As I drove away, my vision blurred with tears. The traffic light ahead turned red, but I barely registered it. My mind kept replaying her words on an endless loop. When I needed her most, when I was at my lowest, she not only abandoned me but revealed she had already replaced me. I wiped my eyes just as the light turned green, accelerating through the intersection. A horn blared to my right, headlights suddenly filling my passenger window. I had missed the red light. The impact came with a deafening crash of metal and glass. Pain exploded throughout my body as my car spun across the wet pavement, slamming into a guardrail. The airbag deployed, slamming into my chest and face. Everything went slow, then fast, then slow again. As blood trickled down my forehead and darkness began to close in, my last coherent thought was a wish. Not to survive, not for Sophia to regret her cruelty, but simply that I could go back and never waste my love on someone who saw me as disposable. The hospital room faded in and out as doctors rushed around me, urgent voices calling out medical terms I didn't understand. My body felt cold, then hot, then nothing at all. "We're losing him," someone shouted. My last thought as the darkness claimed me was of Sophia's face, not as it had been tonight, cold and distant, but from our first date when I thought I had found someone who would stand by me through anything. What a cruel joke life had played on me, and then there was nothing. I gasped awake, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to escape. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains. I blinked, disoriented, and looked down at my hands, expecting to see IV lines and hospital monitors. Instead, I saw unmarked skin, no cuts, no bruises, not even the small scar on my left palm from a cooking accident last year. This wasn't the hospital. This was my old apartment, the one I'd lived in 5 years ago before moving closer to Sophia. The cheap IKEA furniture, the movie posters I'd later taken down at Sophia's suggestion, the ancient laptop on the desk that had died years ago, all exactly as they had been. I stumbled to the bathroom, my legs unsteady beneath me. The face in the mirror was mine, but younger, with no shadows under the eyes, no creases at the corners, no gray hairs starting at the temples. I traced my fingers over my cheeks, feeling the smoothness of skin that hadn't yet been weathered by stress and heartbreak. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, an old model I hadn't seen in years. The date on the screen made my knees buckle. March 15th, 2020, 5 years in the past. The day before I would meet Sophia at Blue Moon Coffee Shop, where she would spill her latte on my laptop and insist on buying me a new one, leading to our first date. "Impossible," I whispered, but the evidence was all around me. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this a dream? A hallucination my dying brain had conjured to escape the reality of my car crash? Or had I actually been given a second chance? My phone buzzed again with a text from Mark, a friend I'd gradually lost touch with after meeting Sophia. "Don't forget, coffee tomorrow at Blue Moon, 9 a.m. The new project manager is starting, and you promised to show me you're not too chicken to talk to her." The new project manager, Sophia. It all came rushing back, the exact sequence of events that had led to our meeting. It hadn't been chance at all. Mark had worked at the same company as Sophia and had been trying to set us up. The coffee shop, the accidental spill, all orchestrated by my well-meaning friend, and I had fallen for it completely, never questioning the too perfect meet-cute story. If this was real, if I had truly been sent back to before I met her, I had a choice to make. I could avoid Blue Moon Coffee tomorrow, never meet Sophia, and build a completely different life. Or I could meet her, but this time with the knowledge of who she truly was, and protect myself from the devastation that would come. I spent the day in a daze, testing the reality of my situation. My job at the marketing firm was exactly as I remembered it, the projects the same, the deadlines identical. My bank account showed the modest savings I'd had before spending most of it on romantic gestures for Sophia. My social circle was intact, friends I'd neglected still just a phone call away. This was no dream. Somehow I had been given another chance. That night I made my decision. I would meet Sophia again, but this time I wouldn't be the same naive, lovesick fool. This time I would remember her true face, the cold calculation behind her smile, the ease with which she had discarded me when I needed her most. This time I would be the one in control. When I walked into Blue Moon Coffee the next morning, it was like watching a movie I'd seen before. Every detail was the same, from the barista's blue-streaked hair to the indie folk music playing softly in the background. And there she was, Sophia, beautiful in a way that made my breath catch despite everything I knew. She sat at the corner table, focused on her laptop, blonde hair falling over one shoulder. In exactly 2 minutes, Mark would introduce us. In 5 minutes, she would reach for her latte and accidentally knock it onto my computer. I steeled myself and approached with Mark, smiling politely as he made the introductions. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a chill despite the warmth of the coffee shop. This was the woman who would one day tell me I wasn't worth staying with. "Nice to meet you, Alex," she said, her voice the perfect blend of professional and friendly. "Mark's told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I replied, the same line I'd used before, but this time without the nervous stammer. We chatted about the company, about her move to the city, about her background in marketing. I watched her carefully, noting how her eyes assessed me, measuring my potential value even in these first moments. Right on cue, she reached for her latte. I could have stopped it, moved my laptop away, changed the entire course of our relationship. Instead, I let it happen, watched the brown liquid splash across my keyboard, feigned surprise and dismay. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, grabbing napkins. "I'm such a klutz, let me buy you a new one, please." I hesitated, pretending to consider refusing. "You don't have to do that." "I insist," she said, touching my arm lightly. "It's the least I can do." And so it began again, our relationship reset to day one. But this time, as we exchanged numbers and made plans to shop for a replacement computer that weekend, I was under no illusions. I saw the calculation behind her smile, the careful way she assessed my clothes, my watch, my potential. In the weeks that followed, I allowed our relationship to develop just as it had before. We went from coffee dates to dinner dates, from casual conversations to deeper ones. But unlike before, I didn't lose myself in her. I didn't abandon my friends or my hobbies. I didn't reshape my life to fit her expectations. Instead, I began making different choices. I took the investment opportunities I had missed the first time around, started the side business I had talked myself out of, maintained connections with friends and colleagues Sophia had subtly encouraged me to distance myself from. While she saw the same Alex on the surface, attentive and caring, beneath I was building a life that wouldn't crumble if she left. A life with multiple foundations, not just her. 6 months in, when she first invited me to meet her parents, I remembered how in the original timeline I had been so eager to impress them that I had agreed to their suggestion to switch departments at work, taking a position with less growth potential but more stability, a job that would eventually be eliminated in the corporate restructuring. This time, when her father hinted at the same opportunity, I politely declined. "I appreciate the thought, sir, but I've got some projects in the pipeline that I'm really excited about." I saw the flicker of surprise in Sophia's eyes, the first deviation from the script she expected me to follow. She said nothing, but that night she was more attentive than usual, as if reassessing her strategy. It was working. I was changing the dynamic, refusing to be the dependent, lovesick Alex she could mold and eventually discard. This new independence awakened something in her, a mix of confusion and increased interest. She began trying harder, no longer taking my devotion for granted. As our first anniversary approached, I looked at the woman beside me, still beautiful, still charming, but no longer holding the power to destroy me. I had built a life she could walk out of without collapsing everything. And in doing so, I had inadvertently made myself more valuable to her. The irony wasn't lost on me. By protecting myself from her eventual betrayal, I had become someone she was less likely to betray. But I never forgot the look in her eyes that rainy night, the cold dismissal when I needed her most. That memory kept me vigilant, even as we moved forward into territory my previous life had never reached. Our relationship continued, but the dynamics were subtly different. Where I had once eagerly anticipated her calls and rearranged my schedule to accommodate her plans, I now maintained my boundaries. When she suggested I skip poker night with my friends to attend a work function with her, I declined politely but firmly. "I already committed to the guys," I said, kissing her cheek. "But I'll pick you up after and you can tell me all about it." The flash of irritation in her eyes was quickly masked, but I caught it. In my previous life, I would have abandoned my friends without hesitation, eager to please her. Now I watched as she recalibrated, trying to understand this version of me that wouldn't bend to her every whim. "You seem different lately," she remarked one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. "More focused on your own things." I stirred the pasta sauce, keeping my expression neutral. "I guess I just learned that balance is important in a relationship. We both need our own lives too, right?" She studied me for a moment before nodding. "Right, of course." As we approached the 2-year mark of our relationship, my investments were beginning to pay off. The tech startup I had ignored the first time around had tripled in value. The side consulting business I had started with Mark was gaining traction, providing a cushion of income separate from my main job. Then came the email that changed everything. Northern Star Media, the main competitor to Sophia's father's company, Meridian Communications, was looking for a marketing director. In my previous life, I had deleted the recruitment email immediately, knowing Sophia would see it as a betrayal to consider working for her father's rival. This time, I responded and set up an interview. When I told Sophia about the opportunity, her reaction was exactly as I expected. First disbelief, then anger. "You can't seriously be considering this," she said, packing my living room. "My father would see it as a direct attack." "It's just business, Sophia," I replied calmly. "Northern Star has better growth potential and the compensation package is significantly better than what I'm making now. But my father could get you a position at Meridian," she countered, the same offer she had made before, the one that had ultimately led to my downfall. "Why work for the competition when you could work with family?" I took her hands in mine, looking directly into her eyes. "Because I need to build my career based on what's best for me professionally, not based on relationships. Wouldn't you do the same?" She couldn't argue with that, not when her own ambitious nature was so well known. Reluctantly, she conceded, though the tension remained. I took the job at Northern Star, and within months, rumors began circulating about Meridian Communications facing financial difficulties. Sophia's father had overleveraged the company on a series of failed acquisitions, and stocks were beginning to slide. In private meetings at Northern Star, I learned what I had suspected from my previous timeline. Meridian was being targeted for acquisition, its valuable client list and media properties the true prize. And I was now in a position to be part of that acquisition team. The knowledge created a moral dilemma. Was I becoming just as calculating and cold as Sophia had been? Was I using my foreknowledge not just to protect myself, but to actively participate in actions that would harm her family? These questions haunted me as I watched Sophia grow increasingly stressed over her father's company. She began staying late at work, canceling our plans more frequently, the same pattern of distance that had preceded her betrayal in my previous life. One night she arrived at my apartment unannounced, her eyes red from crying. "Dad's company is in trouble," she admitted, collapsing onto my couch. "Worse than anyone knows. He's been hiding the extent of the debt, and now the board is talking about bringing in outside investors or even selling." I sat beside her, offering comfort while my mind raced. This was happening sooner than in my previous timeline. The acquisition that Northern Star was planning was still months away from being announced. "I'm scared, Alex," she whispered. "Everything my family built could be gone. And the worst part is that Northern Star is one of the companies circling. It feels like having the enemy in our house." The guilt hit me hard. I was that enemy, privy to insider information about her family's company that even she didn't fully know. Yet I couldn't bring myself to sacrifice my position, not when I remembered so clearly how she had discarded me when our situations were reversed. "Your father is smart," I said instead. "He'll find a way through this." She looked up at me, vulnerability in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Would you help? You understand the industry. Maybe you could look at their books, suggest something we've missed." It was a request she had never made in my previous life, a sign of how our altered relationship had changed her perception of me. In that moment, I realized the extent of the power shift between us. Sophia, who had once seen me as disposable, was now turning to me for salvation. "I'll see what I can do," I promised, knowing I was walking a dangerous line between self-protection and deliberate harm. The weeks that followed brought a new dimension to our relationship. Sophia became increasingly dependent on me, seeking my advice, valuing my insight into the industry. The confident, sometimes arrogant woman who had once held all the power was showing cracks in her facade, and I found myself changing too. The calculated decisions, the strategic positioning, the emotional distance I maintained, all reminiscent of the Sophia who had broken my heart. I was becoming more like her with each passing day. This realization came to a head during a strategy meeting at Northern Star, where the acquisition of Meridian was being planned in detail. As my colleagues discussed the dismantling of Sophia's father's company, the layoffs that would follow, the assets that would be stripped, I felt a coldness settling over me. "Alex, you've worked with Meridian's marketing team indirectly," my boss said. "Which of their people should we keep and which are expendable?" The question hung in the air, a test of my loyalty to Northern Star versus my connection to Sophia. In that moment, I saw clearly what I was becoming, and it disturbed me. I was using my knowledge not just to protect myself, but to actively participate in the destruction of something important to someone I cared about. But then I remembered Sophia's words from that rainy night in my previous life. Love doesn't pay the bills. Her cold dismissal when I was at my lowest point. I'll draw up a list, I heard myself say. There are definitely some talented people worth keeping. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing the man I saw there. The Alex who had died in that car crash had been naive, perhaps too trusting, but he had been genuine. What was I becoming in this second chance at life? The answer came to me slowly. I wasn't becoming Sophia. I was becoming someone who could survive in her world without being destroyed by it. The difference was subtle but important. I wasn't acting out of cruelty or callousness, but out of self-preservation, yet the line between protection and revenge was blurring. Was I guarding my heart, or was I orchestrating a punishment for a betrayal that, in this timeline, had not yet occurred? As I pondered these questions, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Can we talk tomorrow? There's something important I want to ask you. I already knew what the question would be. In my previous life, at this point in our relationship, amid her father's financial struggles, Sophia had suggested we move in together to save on rent, a practical consideration rather than a romantic one. I had eagerly agreed then, seeing it as a step forward in our relationship rather than the strategic move it was. This time would be different. This time, I understood the chess game we were playing and I was several moves ahead. Sophia invited me to dinner at an upscale restaurant we frequented on special occasions. She wore her most flattering dress, her makeup perfect, her smile carefully calibrated. I knew this performance well, had seen it directed at clients and executives she wanted to impress. Now it was aimed at me. I've been thinking about our future, she said over candlelight, reaching across the table to take my hand. We've been together for over 2 years now. I think it's time we take the next step. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. What did you have in mind? Let's move in together, she suggested, her thumb tracing patterns on my palm. My lease is up next month and we're at each other's places most nights anyway. It makes financial sense, especially with everything going on, a delicate reference to her father's company struggling, to the belt-tightening her family was experiencing for perhaps the first time. In my previous life, I had missed the calculation behind the suggestion, had seen only the romantic progress. That's a big step, I said carefully. Are you sure that's what you want? Something flickered in her eyes, perhaps surprise at my hesitation. Of course it's what I want. I love you, Alex. The words should have warmed me, but I remembered too clearly how easily those same lips had dismissed me when circumstances changed. Still, I smiled and squeezed her hand. I love you too, I replied. Let's do it. Relief washed over her face, quickly masked by a smile. Great. I was thinking we could look at that building near the river, the one with the rooftop garden. That's pretty expensive, I noted. Are you sure we can afford it? Well, she said, her tone casual but her eyes intent. With both our incomes and especially with how well you're doing at Northern Star, I thought we could stretch a bit. There it was, the real reason for the timing of this suggestion. My increasing financial stability as her families began to wobble. I was becoming an asset worth securing. Let's look at a few options, I agreed. See what makes the most sense for both of us. We moved in together the following month, but into a more modest apartment than she had suggested. I insisted on a place we could afford even if one of us lost our job, a scenario that seemed increasingly likely for many Meridian employees as rumors of acquisition grew louder. The night we finished unpacking, Sophia surprised me by dropping to one knee in our new living room, a small velvet box in her hand. Alex, will you marry me? The complete role reversal from my previous life left me momentarily speechless. Then, Sophia had hinted heavily about wanting a proposal after 3 years together, had shown me pictures of rings she liked, had orchestrated situations where her friends asked about our future plans within my hearing. I had saved for months for the perfect ring, planned an elaborate proposal, only to face her increasingly cold behavior in the weeks that followed as her father's company began to falter and she met Ryan again through a business connection. This is unexpected, I managed to say, looking at the simple platinum band in the box. Is that a yes? She asked, her confidence wavering slightly at my delayed response. I pulled her to her feet and kissed her gently. Yes, it's a yes. As she slipped the ring onto my finger, I caught a glimpse of something in her expression. Not pure joy, but satisfaction, as if she had secured an important deal. Perhaps she had. That same week, I finalized my investment in the company that would ultimately acquire Northern Star, a move that would position me perfectly for the economic downturn I knew was coming. It was the financial equivalent of a prenuptial agreement, protection against a future I had already lived through once. 2 months into our engagement, Sophia's father called me to his office. Richard Bennett was a silver-haired man with Sophia's same calculating eyes, though time and stress had carved deep lines around them. "You're doing well for yourself at Northern Star," he remarked, pouring 2 glasses of scotch in his wood-paneled office at Meridian Communications. My daughter chose wisely. I accepted the glass with a nod of thanks. "I've been fortunate." "More than fortunate, I'd say," he continued, studying me over the rim of his glass. "Strategic, forward-thinking." A chill ran through me. Did he suspect my involvement in Northern Star's acquisition plans? "I need someone like that in the family business," he said finally. "Meridian is facing challenges, as I'm sure you're aware. I could use someone with your insight." "I'm flattered," I replied cautiously. "More than a flattering offer," he corrected. "I'm talking about a senior position, family-level compensation package, and eventually a path to taking over when I retire. You'd be marrying my daughter anyway. This would solidify your place in the Bennett legacy." It was the same offer he had made to Ryan in my previous life after Sophia left me. The position that had been part of the package deal when she traded me in for a more advantageous match. "I appreciate the offer, sir," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I've built something valuable at Northern Star. I wouldn't feel right abandoning that, especially given the competitive nature of our businesses." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Loyalty is admirable, but family comes first, doesn't it? Sophia speaks very highly of your business acumen. We need that now more than ever." The manipulation was evident, the implied pressure to prove my commitment to Sophia by saving her family's company. I had fallen for it once before, not again. "I think I can be more useful to the family by maintaining my position and connections where I am," I countered. "Professional boundaries are important." He studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're not quite what I expected, Alex. My daughter described you differently." I smiled thinly. "People change, or perhaps they reveal their true selves over time." The same week, Sophia brought home news that sent a jolt of recognition through me. "Dad just hired a new chief strategy officer, Ryan Matthews. He used to work with me years ago before he left for New York. He's brilliant with turnarounds, apparently saved 3 companies from bankruptcy in the last 5 years." "Ryan, right on schedule. Sounds impressive," I commented, keeping my tone neutral. "You knew him well," she hesitated, just slightly. "We dated briefly in college, nothing serious." The lie was exactly as I remembered it. They had been together for 2 years, had talked about marriage before he took a job in New York, and they decided to end things. "It'll be interesting to work with him again," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "Dad thinks he might be the key to saving the company." I watched her carefully, noting the slight flush on her cheeks, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she displayed when being less than truthful. "I'm sure your father knows what he's doing," I said mildly. Following weekend, Sophia insisted I join her for dinner at her parents' home, a gathering that had not occurred in my previous timeline. When we arrived, Ryan Matthews was among the guests, handsome and confident in a tailored suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. "Alex, this is Ryan Matthews, our new CSO," Richard Bennett introduced us. "Ryan, my daughter's fiancé, Alex Chen." Ryan's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Great to meet you. Sophia's told me so much about you." "Funny," I replied with an equally practiced smile. "She's mentioned you only in passing." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise or amusement, crossed his face. Sophia quickly interjected, her hand on my arm slightly tighter than necessary. "Ryan and Dad have been working nonstop on the restructuring plan," she explained. "We're hoping to announce something to the board next week." As the evening progressed, I observed the dynamic between Sophia and Ryan. The easy familiarity, the inside jokes, the way their conversation flowed without effort. I caught the occasional glance between them, charged with an energy that I recognized all too well. History was repeating itself exactly as before. But this time I wasn't the oblivious fiance, desperately trying to prove my worth while my relationship crumbled beneath me. Late that night, after we returned home, Sophia received a text that made her smile softly to herself. Work this late. I asked casually, pretending to be focused on the book in my hands. Just Ryan with a follow-up question about one of our old clients, she explained quickly, perhaps too quickly. Dad's really pushing for results, so we're all working around the clock. I nodded, accepting the explanation she offered while nodding the passcode she entered to unlock her phone, different from the one she had used that morning. Another change, another precaution being taken. The chessboard was set. The pieces were moving exactly as they had before. But this time, I wasn't a pawn to be sacrificed. That night, as Sophia slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, contemplating the path ahead. I was deep into a game where I knew all the moves in advance, had seen the endgame once before. The question was no longer whether I could protect myself from the pain that was coming, but what kind of person I would become in the process. As I turned to look at Sophia's peaceful sleeping face, I wondered if there was still a part of me that loved her, despite everything I knew about her true nature. Or if, like her, I had become capable of maintaining a perfect facade while calculating my advantage beneath. The economy began to falter just as I remembered, the signs appearing first in the housing market, then rippling through finance and into media advertising budgets. Meridian Communications, already weakened by poor acquisitions and mounting debt, was hit particularly hard. Clients began pulling campaigns, cutting budgets, seeking cheaper alternatives. At Northern Star, we felt the pressure too, but our diversified client base and leaner operation provided more cushion against the downturn. In closed-door meetings, the acquisition plan for Meridian accelerated. What had been a 12-month timeline compressed into 6. We need to move before someone else does, our CEO explained. Their stock is dropping daily, we'll never get a better price. Meanwhile, Sophia's stress levels increased visibly. She came home later each night, often smelling faintly of whiskey, the drink of choice in her father's office during crisis meetings. Our once regular dinners together became rare. She checked her phone constantly, jumping at notifications, taking calls in the other room. I knew exactly what was happening, had lived through it before from a different perspective. The first time I had been desperate to help, offering my savings, suggesting we postpone wedding plans to reduce stress, doing everything I could to support her. This time I watched with quiet detachment, focused on protecting my own position as the economic storm gathered strength. One Tuesday morning, my boss called me into his office, expression grave. We're doing a round of layoffs next week. 20% staff reduction across all departments. I nodded, having anticipated this. Will my team be affected? Everyone will feel it, he confirmed. But I wanted to tell you personally that your position is secure. In fact, with the Meridian acquisition moving forward, we'll need you more than ever. Relief washed through me, not because the news was unexpected, but because the timing aligned with my previous life. The future I remembered was still unfolding, which meant my preparations would serve their purpose. There's something else, he continued. The board is concerned about insider information leaking to Meridian before we announce the acquisition. Given your personal connection, I need to ask directly if your fiancé has any knowledge of our plans. None whatsoever, I assured him. Sophia and I maintain a strict separation between our professional lives. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. Keep it that way. The announcement is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. That same evening, I returned home to find Sophia waiting for me, packing our living room with nervous energy. Her makeup was impeccable as always, but couldn't quite hide the shadows beneath her eyes. We need to talk, she said, gesturing for me to sit. Dad called me into his office today. It's worse than we thought. I settled onto the couch, already knowing what was coming. How bad? Bankruptcy bad, she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. The restructuring plan isn't working. Ryan thinks we need a major cash injection to stay afloat while we negotiate with creditors. Ryan thinks. How familiar those words were. That's unfortunate, I said carefully. Has your father approached the bank? No bank will touch us right now, she replied, coming to sit beside me, taking my hands in hers. Alex, I need to ask you something huge. Here it was, the moment that had played out so differently in my previous life. Then she had approached me with tears in her eyes, explaining her father's predicament, asking if I would consider investing my modest savings to help with immediate cash flow problems. I had agreed without hesitation, emptying my accounts to support her family, seeing it as an investment in our shared future. I need a loan, she said, her eyes locked on mine. A substantial one. Just until the company stabilizes. How substantial? I asked, already knowing the answer. 2 million, she replied, watching me closely for a reaction. I know it's a lot to ask, but with your investments performing so well and that bonus you got last quarter. She had been monitoring my finances closely, something I hadn't realized in my first life until it was too late. The same woman who would later tell me I had nothing to offer her now saw me as a potential financial savior. That's nearly everything I have liquid, I said truthfully. What about Ryan? He must have resources after those successful turnarounds. A flicker of something, perhaps guilt, crossed her face. Ryan's already put in what he can. Dad's mortgaged the house. We're all contributing. And if Meridian fails anyway, I asked. What happens to my investment then? Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Is that all you're worried about? Your investment? This is my family's legacy, Alex. Our future, the emotional manipulation, was so transparent now that I knew what to look for. In my first life, I had responded with immediate reassurance, promising to transfer the funds the next day, eager to prove my commitment to our relationship. I thought you'd amount to something by now, I heard her say again in my memory that night in the rain when I needed her most. I need to think about it, I said finally. 2 million is a significant amount. I'd want to see the books, understand exactly where the money would go. Disbelief registered on her face, quickly replaced by determination. Of course, I understand, it's a big decision. She moved closer, her hand sliding up my arm. Why don't we go to bed? We can discuss the details tomorrow when we're both fresh. That night, her affection was more intense than it had been in months, a performance designed to secure my cooperation. I played my part, responding to her touch while my mind remained detached, analyzing her tactics with cold clarity. The next morning, she left early for a breakfast meeting, kissing me goodbye with a whispered reminder about discussing the loan. As soon as she was gone, I checked her laptop, knowing her password from watching her enter it previously. Her email confirmed everything I suspected. Messages between her and Ryan detailed not just Meridian's precarious situation, but their rekindled relationship. Plans for dinners when I was working late, hotel meetings disguised as strategy sessions, discussions about their future once the current crisis passed. Most revealing was an email from 3 days ago. Ryan, Dad's meeting with potential investors went nowhere. We need Alex's money to stay afloat until the Northeastern deal closes next quarter. I'm asking him tonight. Once Meridian is stable again, we can figure out the rest of our situation. He doesn't suspect anything, trust me. Love you. I forwarded the emails to myself, then carefully restored her computer to exactly as I had found it. The final pieces were now in place. The betrayal was unfolding precisely as before, only this time I wouldn't be blindsided by it. That evening, Sophia returned home with food from my favorite restaurant and an expensive bottle of wine. She wore the dress I had once told her I loved most, her manner both attentive and slightly anxious. I've been thinking about your request, I said as we finished dinner. Hope brightened her eyes. And I need more time, I replied, and more information. I'd want to speak with your father directly, review the company financials with his CFO. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course, I'll set that up, but Alex, we're running out of time. The company needs this injection by the end of the week to make payroll. That urgent? I raised an eyebrow. The situation has deteriorated that quickly. You know how these things accelerate, she said, reaching for my hand across the table. Please, Alex, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't absolutely necessary. I studied her face, this woman I had once loved enough to die for, now lying to me with practiced ease while plotting her exit strategy. In my previous life, I had been destroyed by her betrayal. In this one, I had become a spectator to it, watching it unfold with detached fascination. Let me sleep on it, I said finally. This isn't a decision I can make impulsively. Frustration flashed in her eyes before she controlled it. Of course, take all the time you need, just not too much time, okay. Later that night, I received a text from Northern Star's CEO. Announcement moved up. Board meeting tomorrow to approve final offer. Be ready. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. In less than 24 hours, Meridian Communications would learn it was being acquired by Northern Star, their assets to be absorbed, their brand eventually dissolved. Sophia and her father would discover that the company they had been desperately trying to save had already been sold out from under them. and I would be standing on the other side of the transaction, one of the architects of their downfall, rather than another casualty of it. I arrived home early the next day, having excused myself from the office after the board meeting where Northern Star's acquisition of Meridian Communications was officially approved. The announcement would hit the financial press within the hour, and I wanted to be present when Sophia received the news. She was already there, packing our living room with frantic energy, her phone clutched in her hand. She looked up when I entered, relief washing over her face. "Alex, thank God you're home. It's happening right now." Dad just called an emergency board meeting. There's a rumor we're being bought out. I set my briefcase down calmly. "By who? No one knows yet," she said, running a hand through her hair. "But Ryan thinks it might be Northern Star. Please tell me you've heard something." I loosened my tie, taking my time before answering. "Why would I have heard anything? Because you work there," she exclaimed, frustration bleeding into her voice. "Because you're in senior management, because this affects our future." Our future. The same future she had been planning with Ryan behind my back. "Sophia," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something important and I need you to be honest with me." She stilled, wariness replacing her agitation. "What is it? Are you having an affair with Ryan?" The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "What? No, of course not. Where is this coming from? We have much bigger problems right now than your sudden insecurity." I nodded, walking to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. "That's interesting because I have evidence suggesting otherwise." "Evidence?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What are you talking about?" I turned to face her. "Emails, Sophia, hotel receipts, the planning of your strategic sessions that somehow always happened when I was working late." Her expression shifted through several emotions, landing finally on indignation. "You spied on me, you went through my private emails." I protected myself, I corrected. "Something I wish I'd done sooner." She crossed her arms, defensive now. "This is ridiculous. Ryan and I work closely together. Of course we communicate frequently. Of course we have meetings. It's business." "Business," I echoed. "Like your email discussing using my money to keep Meridian afloat until you could figure out your situation with Ryan. Was that just business too?" She froze, the denial dying on her lips. She hadn't expected me to have seen that specific message. Her mind was recalculating, I could almost see it in her eyes, determining the best approach now that outright denial was no longer viable. "It's not what you think," she tried, her voice softening. "Yes, Ryan and I have been spending time together, and yes, there are feelings there. But I was confused, stressed about Dad's company. I never intended to act on it." I almost admired her ability to pivot so quickly, to craft a narrative that painted her as conflicted rather than calculating. "And the loan?" I asked. "Was that confusion too, or were you planning to use my money to stabilize the company that you and Ryan would eventually control together?" Before she could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her face paling further. "It's Dad," she whispered, answering the call. I watched as she listened, her expression crumbling with each passing second. I could hear Richard Bennett's voice through the phone, loud and anguished. "It's Northern Star," she confirmed after ending the call, looking at me with new suspicion. "They've bought a controlling interest in Meridian. The announcement just went public." I nodded, unsurprised. "I know, you know," she repeated slowly. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I replied. "The acquisition plan has been in development for months." Realization dawned in her eyes, horror replacing suspicion. "You knew and you didn't tell me. You let me beg you for money to save a company you knew was already being sold." "Yes." The single word hung between us, its simplicity more devastating than any elaborate explanation. "Why?" she demanded, tears forming in her eyes. "How could you do this to me, to my family?" I moved to the living room window, looking out at the city below before turning back to her. "3 years ago, in another life, I lost my job. When I came to you for support, you left me for Ryan. You told me I had nothing to offer you anymore." She stared at me, confusion replacing anger. "What are you talking about? That never happened." "It did," I insisted quietly. "Just not in this timeline. I died that night, Sophia. Car accident in the rain after leaving your apartment. But somehow I got a second chance. I woke up 5 years in the past before we met. And this time I knew exactly who you were beneath the perfect facade." She took a step back, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "You're not making any sense, Alex." "It doesn't matter if you believe me," I said, moving to the desk where I had left a folder that morning. "What matters is that I know you, Sophia. I know your calculations, your contingencies, your capacity for betrayal when someone no longer serves your purpose." I opened the folder and laid out its contents on the coffee table. Photos of her with Ryan at a hotel, printouts of their emails, financial records of transactions between them. "This is insane," she whispered, staring at the evidence of her deception. "You've been planning this, what revenge fantasy since the beginning. Our entire relationship has been some sick game to you." The irony of her accusation struck me. "No, Sophia, I've been protecting myself from the beginning. The game was always yours." Her phone rang again. Ryan this time. She ignored it, her eyes never leaving my face. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. I retrieved another document from the folder. "Now we end this cleanly. Divorce papers already drawn up. I've been generous with the settlement considering the circumstances." As she stared at the papers, the full impact of the situation seemed to hit her. Meridian Communications, her family's legacy, was gone. Her secret relationship with Ryan exposed. Her carefully constructed future dissolving before her eyes. "You can't do this," she whispered, a note of desperation entering her voice. "We can fix this, Alex. Whatever you think I did or was going to do, we can move past it. I love you." The same words she had thrown at me in my previous life when I discovered her with Ryan after my accident, when she feared I might expose their affair to her father. Meaningless sounds designed to manipulate to secure advantage. "No, you don't," I replied calmly. "You never did. You loved what I could provide: security, status, financial support when needed, but not me." Her strategy shifted again, anger replacing pleading. "And what about you? Have you loved me while plotting all this, while waiting for the perfect moment to destroy my family's company? You're worse than whatever you think I am." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps in my determination to protect myself, I had become something colder, more calculating than the man I once was. The thought had haunted me for months. "Maybe so," I acknowledged. "But the difference is I never pretended otherwise, not really. You chose not to see it, just as I once chose not to see who you truly were." She sank onto the couch, the fight suddenly leaving her. "What am I supposed to do now?" For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine pity for her. In my previous life, I had been the one asking that question, lost and abandoned when I needed support most. "You'll do what you've always done," I said quietly. "Adapt, recalculate, find another path forward. You're nothing if not resilient, Sophia." I picked up my briefcase and the folder of evidence, leaving the divorce papers on the table. "I'll be staying at a hotel until you've had time to make arrangements. The apartment is paid through the end of the month." As I moved toward the door, she called after me, her voice breaking. "Was any of it real, any part of what we had?" I paused, considering the question. Despite everything, there had been moments of genuine connection, flashes of what might have been if we had been different people. Some of it, I conceded, but not enough to build a life on. I closed the door behind me, her quiet sobs fading as I walked toward the elevator. The weight I had carried for years, the memory of that rainy night and her cold dismissal, seemed to lighten with each step. 6 months later, I sat across from James Chen, the head of a venture capital firm specializing in revitalizing struggling businesses. The restaurant overlooked the river, the city lights reflecting on the water as evening fell. "Your investment fund is exactly what we've been looking for," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "A focus on second chances, on businesses that have potential but hit hard times. It's both profitable and meaningful, rare combination." I returned the toast, thinking of the journey that had led me here. After finalizing the divorce and completing my role in the Meridian acquisition, I had left Northern Star to establish the fund with my accumulated investments. "Everyone deserves a second chance," I said. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what matters." James nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of second chances, did you hear about Richard Bennett's new startup, rising from the ashes after that Northern Star takeover?" Impressive resilience, I had heard. Richard had leveraged his industry connections to launch a specialized media consulting firm, smaller than Meridian but potentially more sustainable. Sophia had joined him along with a few loyal former executives. Ryan predictably had abandoned ship when the acquisition was announced, taking a position with a competitor before the dust had settled. "Good for him," I said sincerely. Sometimes walking away from what you thought you wanted is the only way to find what you actually need. As we continued our dinner, discussing investment strategies and potential acquisitions, I reflected on the man I had become. Not the naive Alex who had died in the rain, nor the coldly calculating one who had engineered a perfect revenge. Something in between, perhaps, someone who had learned to protect himself without losing the capacity for compassion. I had received a second chance not just at life, but at becoming someone who could face that life on his own terms. Someone who understood that true strength came not from controlling others, but from refusing to be controlled by fear of loss or abandonment. Outside, rain began to fall gently on the city, but this time there was no desperation driving me out into the storm, no heartbreak clouding my vision. Just the quiet certainty that whatever came next, I was ready to face it, eyes open, standing firmly on my own 2 feet.